welcome to the Election Show. I'm your host, Dr. Christina Greer. I'm an associate professor of political science at Fordham University and the co-host of the FAQ NYC podcast. Joining me today, as always, via Zoom is Matt McDermott, communication strategist and vice president of Whitman Insight Strategies. And also with us today is political analyst and professor of political science at Columbia University, Lincoln Mitchell. Welcome, gentlemen.
Great to be with you.
How are you? We're getting closer to January 20th. I'm smiling. Lincoln, I want to start with you. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, the president and vice president-elect, had an interview with Jake Tapper, a little tongue twister there, on CNN. And for many people, it was so refreshing to see Joe Biden and Kamala Harris interact in such a relaxed manner. The level of respect that each of them has for one another was just something we hadn't seen in quite some time, considering the current president and his views towards women and how he speaks of women in public. But Joe Biden said a few things that were quite important. He said he's going to urge everyone to wear a mask during the first 100 days, symbolically, of his presidency. He said even though a vaccine may be circulating, in the coming months, we might see a worst case scenario before we reach the light at the end of the tunnel. Sadly, we're seeing deaths where it's essentially a 9/11 level of deaths on a single day. We have a record number of people who are hospitalized. Just the other day from COVID-19, more than 100,000 people were receiving treatment. We know we have a group called the long haulers, over 11 million people and counting, who have contracted coronavirus and will have long-term effects possibly, and we just don't know where they are. How are you feeling about this Biden-Harris movement? Are they doing enough right now? Are you feeling comfortable with the tone they're setting? What's your overall impression as we are just under the 50-day mark before they're sworn in?
In general, they've done about as well as one could have hoped for. They have reached out across the aisle. I think the fact that they're not getting any response is very telling, but at least they've sought to do that. Biden understands, because he's been around politics for a long time, that you can't really govern with 51% of the people. That's about the number that voted for him. And he's trying to present himself, as every president should, as the president for all America, which is partially because that's what you need to do and should do, but also because if his support grows, he'll be more effective. The thing that's very striking in that interview was that they talked about, you talked about a lot of the policies and ideas that they have, but it's really governance, right? This is a team that is going to be about governing, not about Donald Trump's ego, not about making Donald Trump feel good, not about some kind of frightening death cult, but about governing. They're not going to be perfect. I don't love every single one of their appointments, and I'm not going to think that, they put every single person that I love at the right place, but they're going to try to solve problems, which is something that the Republican Party has really absented itself from doing since around the time Obama became president. The Republican Party is simply about winning the next election, and in the kind of political vernacular of 2020, owning the libs, right? They're in the business of trolling rather than governance. And what you saw from Joe Biden, not just in last night's interview, but since he won the election, is that he and Kamala Harris are interested in governing and solving problems. They're not going to solve all the problems. This death toll that we're seeing from COVID is not going to magically go away on January 20th. And I can promise you this, on January 21st, the Republicans will be blaming Joe Biden for the people who died on January 20th, and for that matter, on December 20th and November 20th. Right. It's not going to go away magically, but they're going in the right direction and their focus is in the right place.
And Matt, what about you? I mean, as a strategist, you're seeing how they're moving through a very non-traditional transition. What are your thoughts about this particular moment as we seem like we're getting closer to more and more Republicans getting on board? International leaders are definitely getting on board. And Joe Biden is no longer just the candidate, he's the president-elect, and showing just so much of his character, which a lot of Americans find to be decent, something that we have not seen in over 4 years.
That's exactly right. I mean, I've been struck by the tone and tenor that this incoming administration is taking. The president-elect gave a speech earlier this week, essentially saying to the American people that help is on the way. And I think that line itself underscores the problems we're facing today and the problems that the Biden-Harris administration are hoping to overcome as soon as they take office, which is that we are essentially living through a 9/11 every day right now. We are losing over 2,000 Americans unnecessarily to this pandemic. and at the same time still have 11 million people unemployed. And the latest unemployment numbers are frankly abysmal and suggest that the economic rebound we saw this summer has essentially petered out, as many of us expected. And so there's a huge set of crises that the incoming administration faces. And first and foremost, what they need to do is build a federal government that can respond to those, because quite frankly, the Trump administration has not. They are not using the federal government in an appropriate way to tackle the crises that we face. They have apparently just given up altogether on building a new stimulus package for the American people at a time when 11 million people are still out of work. And other than what looks like a haphazard effort to build out a vaccine distribution program, have really put forth no plan of what the next 90 days are going to look like as the Trump administration closes out and Biden takes over. So those are both just huge challenges that the Biden transition faces. From what we've seen in terms of how they're building out their cabinet, they are going to take a government first approach to getting us out of these situations and really using the full force and effect of the government to get us into next summer beyond a pandemic and beyond the economic crisis we face right now.
Right. I mean, as we face sort of these two dual crises simultaneously. I mean, Lincoln, Matt just mentioned this truncated time period before Joe Biden is sworn in. And so we have Donald Trump as a lame duck president, someone who has, ostensibly doesn't need to do any policy in the next 50 days or so. But many people are quite concerned, not just about his international policies, they're playing footsie with Iran, but some of the damage that he'll do, some of the pardons that he's already made, and some that will come down the pike. There's talk that he might pardon his children preemptively. What does this mean for the future of, I would say, Joe Biden and the American public, January 21st, knowing that the president essentially seems as though he wants to burn down the White House and possibly the country as he's leaving?
The damage that he has done to American democracy will continue. And we should look at the pardons in that context, right? Donald Trump came into the White House with no experience and no interest in governing. And what he did, therefore, was he grabbed at the easy tools to understand, right? It's hard to pass a bill through Congress. It's hard to figure out what your priorities are, to get the votes, to write the legislation, to negotiate. It's easy to wave your magic wand and pardon somebody. So Donald Trump is attracted to that. In addition, it's now a very political tool, right? I will pardon my friends who've done shady, illegal things because they're on my side. That sets an extraordinary precedent. It also incentivizes breaking the law. Because if you break the law and your guy becomes president, and you could, then you're going to get a pardon. And you could certainly see that it would incentivize more breaking of the law in even worse ways than we've seen thus far. The pardon has been around since the founding of the country. It is frankly a bizarre holdover from the King of England. And if you go back and look in the 15 and 1600s, there are very boring but good historical reasons why the king had pardon power. But this isn't 1680 in England anymore. It's the 21st century in the United States. And the president, I don't think, should have that pardon power. And if he does, they should use it in better ways than Donald Trump does. But what Donald Trump is doing is he is wiping away the corruption and the criminality that we saw from his people, not just in the last 4 years, but the years leading up to this. That is a terrible precedent. It will change the presidency. And it is a reminder. It is a reminder when we talk about this transition that this is not a normal transition. This is not Bush to Obama. This is not George H.W. Bush to Clinton or Clinton to Bush, right? This is a transition from 4 years of Democratic rollback to an effort to restore and rebuild American democracy. And we need to understand it in that context because it raises a lot of different questions. Because of that, the pardons are only one of them.
Right. I mean, I think it's so interesting, Lincoln, when you talk about the corruption and the theft. I mean, keep in mind, Matt, some of these conversations about the corruption and the theft have to do with the inauguration. So this was happening before Donald Trump was even sworn in, before he even got to Washington, D.C. The questions of charging certain companies 30 times the rate to have events at the Trump property hotel in Washington, D.C. And so Matt, when we think about these blanket pardons, these preemptive pardons possibly of Donald Trump's children and other allies, I want to pivot just a little bit to his ranting and raving. So as you mentioned, we're essentially having a 9/11 level of death on a daily basis. Sadly, it might get worse post the Thanksgiving travel and also the holiday travel coming up. And the fact that certain people in certain parts of the country refuse to stop congregating for brunch or weddings or whatever it may be. And so we know that sadly the death toll will rise. The president decided to have a 46-minute rant talking about election fraud, how he's been a victim of election fraud. His adversaries, people are out to get him. The Democrats are throwing away ballots. I mean, it was a ramble about the election. He even had charts and graphs, but he did not mention the 2,000 plus American citizens who were dying on a daily basis in any sort of context. We've given up on the idea that this president would have empathy, but as Lincoln mentioned, there was no real strategy as to actually try and combat that. What do you make of that as a strategist, and what should the Democrats even do to respond to something that outlandish?
Yeah, look, it's cliche to say at this point, but this is not normal. I mean, this is just insane. And to your point about Donald Trump's speech earlier this week, in addition to making no mention of the pandemic and the huge health crisis that's paralyzing our country right now, he also made no mention of the 81 million Americans who voted him out of office. The baffling thing about the final days of the Trump, tyranny train is that he seems to have no realization for the fact that an overwhelming majority of Americans voted him out of office. We keep hearing about these 70 odd million Americans who voted for Donald Trump and, believe in his philosophy for what America should be. Quite a few million more people in this country voted against that. And I think we need to continue to underscore that because it really does start to undermine the legitimacy of this election when we ignore the fact that so many tens of millions of people unequivocally voted this man out of office. And so I think sort of what we're seeing in these final days, to Lincoln's earlier point, is a continued challenging of our democratic norms, which is why I think more than anything else, Democrats need to remain steadfast after this inauguration in holding both Donald Trump and his administration accountable. We cannot have another administration like this again in American history. And the single easiest way to ensure that we'll not have that again is to hold these people accountable. They committed crimes. There was corruptness. There was lawlessness, both in this White House, but to your point, Christina, leading into this administration as well, both in their campaign and in his private business practices ahead of his presidency. And there needs to be a level of accountability, because if there's not, this sets a precedent that any future president is quite literally above the law. I mean, that's what this pardon power is. It's a suggestion to the American people that a president can do crimes and at the end of his administration, basically sign away any legal authority of holding him accountable. That is beyond unconstitutional. It's just not healthy for a democracy like ours. And Democrats need to stand up and say that.
Right. I wish Republicans would stand up and say that as well, because sadly, Matt, I feel like we're going to feel the effects of this administration for at least a generation. And my real concern is that some of these behaviors will trickle down to governors and senators, where all of a sudden, when we have election results, people will say, well, you know what? It was fraud and I don't believe it. And so I want another recount. I'll pay for one. I'll pay for these particular counties the way Donald Trump did in Wisconsin. But Lincoln, what's interesting is that, Matt mentioned the word, crime sprees. I mean, this president seems like he wakes up and is like, let's go criming today. Like, I'd like to go criming. And he's been able to do it because his Senate Republican colleagues have said, sure, criming's fine with us, right? We'll pardon people and, we'll be on board in the media. But one of his staunch allies has been Attorney General Bill Barr. Now, after poor Jeff Sessions left with his tail between his legs, he was the first senator to ever support Donald Trump. He recused himself for one case in the very beginning, and their relationship went south. The president, the first time in modern history, went out of his way to make sure a member of his own party wasn't reelected. So he's put a lot of Republicans on notice, and I think that explains a lot of their behavior. But Bill Barr may be fired or may resign. The president was asked point blank whether or not, how he feels about Bill Barr, and he said, ask me in a few weeks. Now, this is someone who's been a steadfast ally, who has helped with some of these pardons of Flynn and Roger Stone. The president is incredibly angry with Bill Barr right now because Bill Barr has stated that no widespread voter fraud has been found. And so the danger that you and Matt have been speaking of is that we have this dichotomous relationship where on the one hand, Republicans are saying, well, all the senators and members of the House who were reelected or elected for the first time, those ballots were fine. But in the states that Donald Trump lost, those ballots were not fine. And so which one is it, right? I mean, make this make sense for us. And Bill Barr finally came out and said, well, actually, there wasn't any corruption. Actually, there wasn't fraud. The Democrats aren't sort of stuffing ballot boxes and creating ballots out of nowhere, as certain folks would suggest on the Republican side. So where do you see this relationship going? Bill Barr has essentially undercut the president's baseless assertions that the Democrats have been stealing the election. Republican Senate members have said publicly that the Justice Department has yet to see widespread fraud. They're not necessarily supporting Joe Biden as president-elect, but they're coming as close to the line as these jelly-spined senators will do. So where does Bill Barr go in the next 50 days? Because we know the president is very unhappy with it.
Well, early in Donald Trump's term in the White House, he said famously, "Where's my Roy Cohn?" And Bill Barr is his kind of bloated Goyish Roy Cohn, right? He found his Roy Cohn. Now, like Roy Cohn, Bill Barr is in the business of protecting and promoting Bill Barr, right? Trump is a client. Trump and he have a confluence of interest, but he's not, like many powerful Republicans, including Mike Pence, including Mitch McConnell, he's not really going to fall on his sword for this Trumpian fantasy. But I want to highlight two things that are very important that happened. One thing that happened this week and one other thing. In addition to saying there was not enough evidence of election fraud, and if you parse Bill Barr's words closely, he left room. He left that door just a tiny bit open. New evidence could emerge. We don't know that that's not going to, but in his mind. But secondly, he appointed or extended John Durham as special counsel to look into the origins of the Russia investigation. And we know that Bill Barr was brought in as Attorney General, and his first act was to misrepresent the findings of the Mueller report so that Trump could scream total exoneration and tweet that for 6 months, right? And we know that the Kremlin relationship with the Trump campaign is the scandal that poisoned the Trump presidency from the very beginning, and they will do anything to continue to conceal that from the American people. But by appointing this investigator, and then the senators on the Republican side saying, we support this and Biden can't fire him, that is a shot across the bow from McConnell, the Republican senators, that they will not work with Joe Biden. That, to me, what we saw in the 48 hours there, that's basically Wednesday and Thursday of this week, is the piece of, I don't want to say evidence, but proof that the Republican senators have no interest in working in this administration. And I hope Biden and Kamala Harris, and I'm sure because they're smarter than me on this stuff, they understand that. This question of what happens to William Barr, I mean, I would submit it doesn't matter. What's he going to do? Fire William Barr tomorrow and then try to get another attorney general? Who's going to take who other than, maybe some complete hack, almost disbarred lawyer?
Yes, that's exactly what would happen, Lincoln.
But that person can't do anything with that job. The Justice Department, other than, rant and tweet, and at this point, ranting and tweeting is irrelevant. If I were Donald Trump, what I would be doing is going to William Barr and saying, I'm stuck with you. Where do we find common ground? Because he's not going to get a better situation as heading the Justice Department than William Barr for the next 50 days. He can kind of rage fire him, right? Which would actually be the best possible thing for William Barr, who can then go back to the political establishment and say, look, I could, and try to salvage his deeply damaged and I think really criminal reputation. I mean, when the story of the Trump presidency is written, there will be a special chapter on how destructive William Barr has been, regardless of towards the end here.
So Matt, it seems as though Lincoln has laid out a case, but I feel like Lincoln, most of the time we agree, the case you just laid out seems as though we're dealing with a quasi-rational Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah, he could fire him
looking
tomorrow.
at the forest for the trees.
Yeah,
I feel like we're dealing with an erratic, nervous man. He's looking at the other side of January 20th. I think he is desperate. I think he would, like, if he doesn't have good people around him, right, he would fire Bill Barr and put in a hack and let the hack do whatever damage he can do for the next 50 days. Matt, what's your analysis on the Barr relationship with Donald Trump and any speculation as to where we're going with this?
Yeah, look, I mean, why not? I think we're all in agreement that the man is intent on burning the place down figuratively in his final days, and this would only suit that. I think to bring this sort of into the political realm, though, the problem it presents for them to continue this conversation about whether there was fraud, where there was fraud, was it an election, was it not an election, should people vote moving forward, should they be cynical and doubt the electoral process? The problem for Republicans is that they have another election in 5 weeks. They need to win 2 Senate seats in Georgia to maintain their only power of control right now in Washington, which is the Senate. And if they don't win those 2 seats, they are not only out of power, they literally have no hand in the conversation moving forward. And so the problem they have right now is they have this lunatic in the White House who's just bombastically closing out his final days, shouting about fraud. And you have an entire party that needs to win 2 Senate seats 5 weeks from now. That is not a recipe for success. And you've seen that problem unfold this week, wherein you've got Republican senators going down to Georgia and saying Republicans have to stand up and be motivated to participate in this election. And you have Donald Trump and his minion lawyers going around the country and saying, stop participating in elections. They don't count. They don't matter. They're fraudulent. And so we should just step back and refuse to participate in this system. Well, look, if Republicans refuse to participate in the system 5 weeks from now, Democrats control the Senate and the entirety of the political apparatus in Washington. So this is a party in disarray right now, largely because of Donald Trump's antics. And they need to figure out what to do with this man in the next few weeks, because otherwise they really are at risk of losing these 2 Senate seats. And Democrats on the flip side should realize the opportunity that presents and, you know, for lack of a better analogy, stoke this fire to ensure that we can win those 2 Senate seats in 5 weeks.
Right. I mean, I feel like we're living in some sort of weird Twilight trolling zone, because to see Republicans in Georgia imploring other Republicans not to vote in a sham election on January 5th. We know the president is going down this weekend, and he will most likely add gasoline to a wildfire. Lincoln, in the last few minutes we have, I want to get you and Matt's thoughts on some cabinet positions. But I think what's worrying me about the cabinet positions is that Joe Biden's walking into a Senate led by Mitch McConnell. If Georgia does not go the Democrats' way, it will be Republican controlled, and Mitch McConnell has basically all but said no Democratic agenda, no Biden agenda will get through. Joe Biden still feels like he knows these people. And maybe the Mitch McConnell that he knew 40 years ago is not the Mitch McConnell of today. The Republican Party that he worked with across the aisle for several decades is not the Republican Party that we're looking at today. How confident are you for Joe Biden and the Democrats to get some of these appointees pushed through the Senate for confirmation when Joe Biden wants to hit the ground running? He's making these announcements. He's being very clear what he wants to do. Really briefly, is he going to be able to even get the quality people on the team based on the Senate composition if the Republicans keep the Senate?
If the Republicans keep the Senate, I don't expect him to get, he may get 1 or 2 of these people confirmed, but they will make problems for every single one of these nominees. And the reason I say that is, one, you're right. This is not the Mitch McConnell of, I don't know, 2004 or something. This is a Republican Party that keeps pledging that their role here is to obstruct, and they have no interest in governance. But the additional reason for that is that the Republican leadership in the Senate has had every opportunity to break with the extraordinarily damaging and erratic behavior from Donald Trump and say, listen, Joe Biden won this election. We're not happy about it. And they haven't done that. And that's why their threats about what happens if you fire John Durham, they are sending every signal that they have no intention of working with this administration. And the administration must understand that. And they cannot get blindsided. They cannot be so so just a triumph of hope over reality to get blindsided by this.
So, Matt, in the last few minutes, I want to just ask really quickly, Donald Trump is still fundraising on the stolen election and making sure that Joe Biden doesn't have an agenda. He's up to $170 million to help him pay off past debts. Is this just a con? Is this the con that he's using to walk out the door?
A total grift. I mean, this is sort of
you said a total grift.
Legacy of the Trump administration. It is a fundraising grift. And it gets worse than just the campaign. You now see rumors over the last few days that Don Jr. is considering a run to head up the NRA, which is, after the Trump campaign, the most corrupt grift in Republican politics today. And you see Don Jr. saying, well, if I did so successfully at the Trump campaign grift, I might as well head over to the NRA. The entire party on the right at this point is just an effort by rich corporatists to basically take money from hardworking Americans and use it to fundraise for their own benefit and fill their own coffers. It is the legacy of this administration.
And sadly, it'll be the legacy for many years to come, which is quite concerning. Gentlemen, unfortunately, this is the fastest 30 minutes of my week, and that's all the time we have with you. Thank you all both so much for being here with me. I'm Dr. Christina Greer. You've been watching The Election Show. This episode will air on MNN HD Sundays at 7:30 p.m. and on Mondays on Free Speech TV at 7 p.m. Thanks for watching The Election Show. Have a great week.